you can go to university and study it for 3 years. So I'm only going to be able to just touch briefly on the topic, really. I thought I would divide the evening into three sections. First of all, just talk briefly about some of the differences between maritime archaeology and land archaeology, and then specifically look at some of the maritime archaeology sites in and around Wales, and then finish off with taking one of those Welsh sites and using it as a case study. The other thing here, I thought I'd start with this image, which I hope you can all see, of the seascape here. It's how most people view underwater archaeological sites, or don't view it, as the case may be. It's very much out of sight and out of mind for most people. So let's launch into this and see how we get on. So let's look at a couple of maritime sites. Well, one maritime site and one terrestrial site. They're both scheduled monuments. Here is a nice image of Raglan Castle. I'm not showing this for any particular reason other than I've got a nice image of it, but it's, as I'm sure you all recognise, it's a Grade 1 listed building. It's a scheduled ancient monument and very much part of our visual heritage. By comparison, its equivalent on the maritime front is, this is an example, is the Resurgam submarine off the north coast of Wales. It's a scheduled ancient monument, as is Raglan Castle, but it's very part of our hidden heritage, mainly because it's 6 miles offshore and in about 12 metres of water. And even on a good day, bad day rather, divers have a job to see much more than their hand in front of their face. So let's just move on, having looked at these two sites, and think about what archaeology is about, and it's about mankind and humankind. And so what do the humans get up to on archaeological sites? So let's just look at the archaeologists who might be working on these sites for a start. So here we've got a group of young and some not so young land archaeologists, and this is how they might approach their site first thing in the morning, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. By comparison, this is how their counterparts might approach their maritime site first thing in the morning. You can see it's a completely different aspect of how you might attack a site. That's fairly light-hearted. What I thought I would do is I'd pick out a couple of differences between maritime and land sites, and look at them a little bit more technical. And the two that I've decided to do, the first one is actually looking at site formations. I'm sure a lot of you are very familiar with how terrestrial sites are excavated and recorded and so on. But sites can evolve very, very differently between the two branches of archaeology. Here is I apologise for this not being a Welsh church, but it happens to be quite close to where I live in Morven in Worcestershire. And those of you that will probably recognise that it's got two completely contrasting ends to this church. On the right-hand side, on the west end of this church, it's very Norman, and on the east side, it's a brick extension at a later date with its matching tower. And completely different approaches. And here is a sort of quick thumbnail look at the historic and archaeological site record for this particular site. And you can see that prior to the Norman church being built, there was an Anglo-Saxon church before that. And archaeologists, when they've been excavating in the area, have come across grave markers and headstones going back even further, even to they suspect there being a temple on the site, because some of the Anglo-Saxon church was constructed using stones from the Roman period. Excuse me. So this heritage site has evolved in a very static environment over time, and it provides, when you excavate, very orderly archaeological stratigraphy. So by comparison with that, this is obviously a very dynamic environment. This is a Welsh site. This is Abercastle Bay in the north coast of Pembrokeshire. And just before COVID, this is where we ran a 10-day field school on behalf for the Royal Commission to commemorate the centenary of the end of the First World War. We had the best part of 100 divers and helpers for the 10 days on this site, but for 3 days it looked like this, and there is no way we were going to put divers in the water in these conditions. It would just be far too dangerous. So sites have evolved differently, and although maritime is a very much junior, newer branch of maritime archaeology, and it really wasn't until the 60s when scuba came available for most people, the self-contained underwater diving apparatus, that divers, people with an interest in maritime archaeology, were able to get underwater and start to look at the sites in much more detail. And one of these pioneers was Keith McElroy. And he produced a paper called Maritime Cultural Site Formation Process. Now, most of the maritime sites off the coast and in and around the coast involve ships, because ships are very vulnerable. And when they come to grief, and the cause of them coming to grief can be colliding with another vessel out at sea, catching fire, explosions, running into icebergs. But the most common cause of the damage is particularly prior to the back end of the 19th century, when most ships were wooden. Coming into contact with land was the most dangerous thing that they could do. So what Keith produced was some idea of how shipwrecks can form on the seabed. So after they've had their collision or whatever the wrecking process involves, there will be damage to the vessels, almost certainly. Material might float away. It could float away for a long distance before it sinks, or it could float for days and weeks and even years and finish up on beaches miles from where the incident occurred. So the site is already growing and being turned over. Eventually, the rest of it will finish up on the seabed somewhere in and around the area where the incident happened. If there's anything worth having back off the site, there might be some salvage operations that take place, which means material becomes removed from the site straight away. And then over time, anything that's delicate and perishables are likely to disintegrate, float away, and so on. It will start to deteriorate and things like that. So we've got all sorts of things that can happen even once it's on the seabed. And then, of course, we've got seabed movements. Now, I'm not talking here about earthquakes and things like that. I'm just talking about the normal run-of-the-mill, like we get around the coast of the UK. The tides twice a day will be going from one direction across the site and then turning and coming the other way. So you've got movement of sand and aggregate, and gradually wearing away at the artifacts that are left on the site. The other thing that we can get often, as we well know, is storms, and storms are likely to have a big effect on the wrecking of what's on the seabed. It can turn over complete sites, which might give rise to more salvage being required as other things become exposed, and of course more perishables and so on. And then eventually we finish up with what Keith describes as the characteristics of excavation, and this is basically what the maritime archaeologists will find on the seabed when they start to look. Maybe it's on the seabed, it might have been absorbed into the seabed, it might have been concreted into rocks and whatever else there is down there. So you can see we also, where ships particularly hit reefs and things like that and the coast, it tends to be a common place where ships are likely to wreck. So that you're likely to also find when you get down to the seabed, it's not just one ship there, but it could be several in one location, all tangled up amongst each other and almost impossible to completely sort out what's what. So unlike the more common formations in a static terrestrial site, maritime sites are very often dynamic and rarely allowed to form gracefully over time. So on land, sites commonly use light, because the other technical aspect I'm going to talk about is the difference in maritime sites and land sites and the technology that we use. We have some that are common, but mostly they're quite dissimilar. So on land, you would commonly likely to use light, and here's a couple of examples. You dig out your total station, you might use LiDAR. Those of you that might recognise that LiDAR site there as Bardsey Island, in the top end of Cardigan Bay, just beyond the end of the Three Peninsula. But light doesn't travel very well underwater. What does travel well is sound. And in fact, it's quite disturbing to be diving underwater and hear a ship go by with the propellers turning these days. They could be a long way away, but it feels like they're right overhead. So these are some of the methods that we use with sound. Most ships these days, even small boats, are likely to have a fish finder or an echo sounder attached to them, so the crew's got some idea of what's on the seabed. But side scan sonar is the way forward. It can pick up a lot of detail. You can get good bathymetry of the seabed, like that image below there. Or if you have a multi-beam sonar, we can even produce 3D point cloud images of shipwrecks like the Royal Oak here. Something on the right there you may not have come across before is a sector scan sonar. This is just about to be deployed, and you can see what it consists of. It's a tripod, and suspended from the apex is a sonar head, which can be rotated. Being on a tripod, it doesn't matter how uneven the seabed might be that it lands on, the sonar head will hang vertically, and as it rotates, it will fire sound out and recover it. And you'll get an image of exactly what there is close by to the sector scan sonar, and you can see you can get some quite good images from that. We do have different equipment that we use that can't be used in each other's environments. We don't always launch underwater remotely operated vehicles like this, but if need be, yeah, that's the way it might happen. Photography, of course, is something we both are likely to use, both on land and underwater. One of the advantages of taking photos underwater, if it's clear enough, to get a good overview of the site, all you need to do is put a little bit of air into your suit or your jacket, and you can rise up to the height that you want and take some nice aerial shots without having health and safety to bother with. Sketching and drawing, of course, is common to both medias as well. The one on the left there is actually myself sketching an Ottoman wreck in the Eastern Mediterranean after we'd excavated it. And then on the right there, we're sketching a ship, a small vessel on the Mumbles in South Wales. So just to finish this section off, we have intertidal sites, of course. They're not all underwater. The hybrid being that part of the day it's going to likely to be covered, part of the day it's not. And sometimes working in this dynamic environment in an intertidal site can be a great advantage, particularly if you're looking to carry out some excavation. Because you're all very aware, I'm sure you've all played with sandcastles on the beach, and you know that as soon as the tide comes in, it just completely disappears. So if you start to excavate underwater, it can be really quite difficult. So occasionally after a good storm, you can get an interesting intertidal maritime site having excavated itself. I'd just like to thank Ken Murphy for this image, and the next one I'm just going to show you. This is an image of a site on Marra Sands in South Wales. It's obviously a shipwreck. On the right-hand side there, you can see the stern post, and it's just visible normally like this, with the small sections of the wood timbers just above the sand. That was taken in 2015. The year before, it looked like that. One storm had converted it, basically. Now, to excavate to that condition so you can get a good overview of this shipwreck would have taken a lot of work. And Marra Sands, if anyone's familiar with it, doesn't have road access, so you wouldn't be able to get a decent excavator in there to do that. It would be a lot of work, but the environment's done it for you. Of course, once we get a site turned up like that, we jump on it and we pretend we're land archaeologists. We dig out our total station, put on our high vis, and we're jumping all over it. You can see that not only was the shipwreck exposed, but you can see from some of these pictures there, the peat deposits are also exposed. And in some of the peat deposits there, we came across some post holes that looked very much like they might have been the remains of fish traps and fish weirs. And the top right-hand image there is of the winch presumably from the bow of this vessel, which had become completely disarticulated from the wreck itself and was some distance away in a small pool of water. So we were able to observe that for the first time as well. So having jumped on this site, we do what all good archaeologists do: we disseminate the information and produce a report on it. So that's got through the first little bit. Let's now have a turn to looking at Wales in a little bit more detail. I don't have to explain to you where Wales is. Let's just look at some statistics. The land area of Wales is generally considered to be around about 21,000 square kilometres, 8,100 square miles. The seabed area of Wales is the government Welsh Assembly is responsible for, is out to the 12-mile limit or halfway towards the Welsh neighbours like Ireland and England and so on. And the area there we're talking about is shown there on that image, that map there, by that red line out in the Irish Sea there and around Liverpool Bay and up the Severn Estuary. And the area of that is around about 32,000 square kilometres. So it's half as large again as the land area of Wales. But what maritime archaeologists are particularly interested in is the length of the coastline, because this is where most shipwrecks will wreck up against when they come up against the coast. The length of the coastline is very fluid because it ranges from high water to low water and so on. But the actual length is about 1,678 miles. That is about twice the length of the Welsh coastal path. I'm sure you're fully aware that the Welsh path doesn't cover every last nook and cranny of the Welsh coastline. It's not easy to figure out what 1,678 miles looks like, but it's a long way. In fact, it's about 8 times the distance by road from Cardiff to Holyhead, or 4 return journeys, and you can imagine how long that would take. It's a fair distance. So let's look at the area and what we've got out there. Let's just look at the Welsh National Monument record for Wales. I'm advised that there is in excess of 80,000 sites on the monument, NMR, of which about 5% are scheduled. And of that 80,000, about 8,000, 10% are actually maritime sites. So the ratio of maritime to land sites is completely out of proportion to the areas of water and seabed as opposed to the land. Now, during COVID, CADU produced this document, which is very interesting to read and very informative. It covers coastal sites, that's the sea area and the intertidal zone. There is an area it doesn't cover, which I'll explain in a minute. It also gives a breakdown of the 8,000 maritime sites. It tells us that there is about 5,500 shipwrecks, of which only about 1,400 have actually been recorded. There's some aircraft, predominantly military, there's fish traps, there's anchorages, there's lighthouses, there's submerged forests. And the other things that it actually covers under the title Managing the Maritime Historic Environment is a lot of land sites as well. And I know that Luke explained in the last talk about promontory fault that he was been working on, but these last items there are much more likely to be investigated and recorded by terrestrial land archaeologists. The area that this document doesn't cover, which is quite surprising because it doesn't cover inland sites, and there's a lot of wet inland sites, as you can see. Some of them I've listed there, from reservoirs and canals and so on. The last one, moats, obviously castles, some have castles, some don't have moats, and they may be wet, they may be dry. But by and large, if it's a wet site, I'm not sure whether it's a good idea for many terrestrial archaeologists to start getting in the water and trying to figure out what's in there. It might be better to call in maritime archaeologists to help. Shipwrecks, as you can see from that breakdown, is the most common maritime site out there. So with over 8,000 Welsh maritime sites out there, we've got 4,500 maritime shipwrecks. And of those, I know that this was from 2020 when Cadu put that together. Coughlin had been working, sorry, the Royal Commission had been working and produced on Coughlin a lot more already. And this is certainly going to grow the amount of shipwrecks out there because we certainly haven't nailed them all yet. So we're already approaching 6,000 shipwrecks around the Welsh coast. Now, here's a map that I've taken from Shipwrecks of North Wales by Ira Wynne-Jones. And just so you don't have to count them, there's 174 wrecks shown on that map. And you'll probably recognise the top end of Cardigan Bay there, with the Theleme Peninsula at the top there. Now, you might think that this is a lot of wrecks in such a relatively small area. But I can tell you that this isn't the total number of wrecks in this area. We reckon that only represents about 30% of all the losses in that area. And we have a current database which stands at 585 vessels in this similar area. So you can see we've got almost 10% of all the wrecks around the Welsh coast. We've got 585 on our list, and that completes very nicely with 5,844 from Coughlin. So in addition to this, what might surprise you is that of this approaching 6,000 shipwrecks around the Welsh coast, that there are only 3 that are scheduled under the Ancient Monuments and Archaeological Areas Act, and only 6 that are designated under the Protection of Wrecks Act. So this isn't many for such a lot of wrecks. Let's just have a quick look at those 9. It won't take long to go through them quickly. The 3 scheduled wrecks are all 19th century, so none of them are very ancient. The first one is it was in the Taff estuary. It's a Canadian merchant vessel called the Louisa. But once the Cardiff Bay Barrage was erected, this site, that image which was taken, as you can see, in 2018, is now no longer visible because it's no longer in a tidal site. It's covered all the time, which is probably helping to preserve it. The second one I want to look at that's scheduled is in Berryport Harbour on the south coast. And there are 5 or 6 iron tugboats in the harbour, and this is an image of what they look like. And the reason you can't see it or see them in this image is that they are now helping to shore up the breakwater, which has subsequently been built, and it's outlined there in red. So what these scheduled tugboats are doing is acting, if you like, as sort of rebar to hold this breakwater together. I'm not sure that's the best use of a scheduled site, but that's where it is. The third site are 3 hulks on Inislas Beach. They are, we think, part of the original 19th century Dermaless fleet of sailing barges, which would have cruised up and down the River Dyfi, bringing slate down from the quarries to Abu Dhabi, where they'd be transshipped. This is the one that, when you arrive on the beach, is the most visible. The second one is quite small and there's hardly anything visible. My pointer you might be able to see there's a couple of small pieces of timber just showing out of this beach, but the beach is so soft that my colleague there, Sue, with a small probing rod, we were able to go around and identify how big and the outline of this particular vessel. The third one is probably the most interesting, although it's the hardest to get at, and one not many people will know it's there. This third wreck was completely absorbed in the beach. Nothing was visible. But the river here, which is running behind it here, is the Afon Leri, and it's running out into the Dyfi. And twice a day, the whole of this site is covered. So high water would be somewhere up here, covering the whole of this site, including this wreck. So twice a day it's drying out, and twice a day it's being completely submerged. This wooden wreck is emerging out of the bank and out of the beach as the Afon Leri wears the beach away. And This wooden vessel would, like a lot of 19th century vessels, would have been held together using treadles, which are like wooden dowels. So twice a day they are being completely saturated, and twice a day they're drying out. So they're expanding and contracting. The planks fall off, and the next tide washes them away. So as this emerges, it is being lost. We've produced various reports over the years on all of these wrecks, and a couple of seasons we work with that, working with them as it's an intertidal site, and it was good fun to engage with them and work with them. So that's the three scheduled monuments. The six protected wrecks are a bit more interesting in their way. They vary from different eras. The oldest is an 11th century site, Viking site. It's just off the Smalls, just off of Pembroke, out from Milford Haven there. The only item that's been found and discovered on this site, the Smalls is just a rocky outcrop with a lighthouse on it, is a brass Viking sword guard. In fact, there's nothing else been observed there. So it's really not really a site. It's much more of just a fine spot. But it's interesting. The second one is in the Menai Straits. It's a slate wreck. It's known as Blathanog, after the nearest habitation to it. It's a pre-industrial wreck because the slate on board, as you can see from that murky image at the bottom there, it shows that the slate itself was slit by sliced, broken by hand, and not using industrial equipment. The third wreck is probably one of the most interesting. It's certainly the one we know the most about. It's the Royal Yacht Mary. It was wrecked in 1675 out on the Skerries, which is north west of Anglesey. You can see it there. The Skerries again is a rather larger rocky outcrop with a lighthouse on it. And the yacht itself, this is a model of what it would have looked like. It was presented to Charles II on his coronation by the Dutch. So we know a lot about that. The fourth wreck is, again, unknown wreck. So it's named after the local nearest habitation, which is Tallybont. So it's often known as the Tallybont wreck, although sometimes it's known as the Bronze Bell site, because the bronze bell has been recovered off the site, together with anchors and cannons and a whole host of things, many of which are currently in the museum in Barmouth and well worth a visit if you're ever up that way. The other thing that's is on this site is the cargo, and we think it is Carrara marble, great large blocks of it. Where it was going or what the aim of it was, where its destination, where the marble was destined for, we've no idea. But we know it went down in 1709. It's a great dive. It's quite close to the beach. It's not quite close enough to fin to and swim out to, but there's a lot there to see. And over the years, we've written quite a few reports on various aspects of it, predominantly for Caddo, both looking at the material that's been recovered from the site, but also the possibility of it becoming a diver site, so that other divers can actually go out under license to have a look at the site. The fifth site I've already mentioned. It's the Resurgam off of Rhyl, off of North Wales. It's the first steam power submarine. It was lost in 1880 while under tow, and you can see from the little inset in the map there, it's surrounded on three sides now by wind farms. So it's a great dive on a nice day. All the anemones, the squidges and Klingons that I know absolutely nothing about are all there for us to see. It's fairly shallow and a nice dive. It's just a way offshore. And the very last site there is the most recent. It's a mid-19th century large wooden sailing vessel, initially thought to be the Diamond, and it wrecked on the Sandbadrig Reef, which hopefully you can see there on that chart. And this is what it looks like underwater, a nice black and white image. And this is the site that I've dived on quite a lot over the course of the last quarter of a century almost now. And the site I'm going to now use for the rest of this talk as the case study. So the background to this protected wreck site is in the top end of Cunningham Bay, where that little square box is. And here's the chart for that area. It's quite close to the Tallybont site. The reef itself is about 12 miles long, and there's sections of this that dry. And this means is the reason that there's so many wrecks on this site. There's a close-up of it. Those that know charts will recognise that the green sections out on that reef are the sections that dry. And about 150 vessels have wrecked on this reef over the years. It's sometimes known as St. Patrick's Causeway because when you stand on the beach looking out at sea at this reef, it looks like so far out to sea. 12 miles is a long way to sea. It looks like it could stretch all the way to Ireland. Now, just looking at the map of the UK there, particularly through the 19th century, most shipping went in and out of the UK via Liverpool. It was bringing raw materials in to supply the Industrial Revolution, and finished goods were being exported. So the ships, which were predominantly wooden, would come in on the prevailing southwesterlies, but inevitably, being wood and being under sail, many of them would be blown into this hook of land round between the mainland and the Thliin Peninsula and be caught on this reef. That's why there's so many wrecks in this area. Now, the reef itself wasn't buoyed until 1870. So that was quite late on through the 19th century. And there was a lot of hue and cry over the number of wrecks that were getting into trouble on this reef. So back in the summer of 2000, a couple of local divers were out looking along this reef, and they came across a large wooden vessel just to the north side, where you can see on the chart there, I put a question mark and the little arrow. The wreck is part buried, but it's intact. It's sitting upright on the seabed. It's just over 2 miles offshore in about 6 to 10 meters of water, depending on the tide. Initial thoughts were that this wreck might be the fully rigged merchant ship, the Diamond, that was wrecked on the reef in 1825 en route from New York to Liverpool. We don't have an image. We can't find any images of the Diamond, but this is roughly what it would have looked like. It's not bristling with cannons and gun ports and things like that, but it's a 3-masted square rigger, a fairly standard merchant ship of the period. Inspection of the site shows that the main timber frames, which, if I use the pointer here, would be in this area here. They've been being wood, they've all been eroded away, have been reinforced on the inside with these iron knee riders, and these would have stretched, you can see them all the way down the site here. These would have stretched up through the decks, and at the top weather deck, they'd have probably turned inboard and supported the main deck beams of the weather deck. They would have extended down into the seabed and curved, because we're working at the turn of the bilge here towards the keel. And then you can see these large pins that would have run through, connecting these iron knee riders through the main frames onto the outer planking, which is here. And then on outside of that, we've got some metal sheathing. So at the beginning of the 19th century, vessels predominantly wood, and at the end of the 19th century, they were predominantly iron. So in between there, we have this hybrid period where wooden vessels were having more and more iron attached to them to make them longer and stronger and so on. So we have this area. Now, because the Diamond wrecked in 1825, that's quite early on for this conversion to having a lot of iron fitted. And if this is the Diamond on the site, then certainly it will be a very early example of a composite vessel. And consequently, Cadw decided to protect this site, making it the 6th site around the Welsh coast designated under the Protection of Wrecks Act. So following the designation, we were asked if we could carry out some further investigations to try and authenticate whether or not it is the Diamond or not. And this image here shows in the foreground one of these iron knee riders, in the background what is one of 2 water tanks, we think, for carrying potable water for drinking. So over the next 7 years, we were granted various licenses by Cadw to dive and work on this site. We surveyed the wreck, and on a couple of visits with Wessex Archaeology, we recorded a lot of the site's features. Wessex actually have better photography facilities than we do, so that's hence me showing you quite a few of their photos. We also carried out ourselves, targeted excavations to reveal some of the remains of the wooden frames. We recovered timber samples from them and from other parts of the ship for species identification, dendrochronology, and together with sheathing samples for metallurgical analysis, it all helped us build up a picture of what we think this ship might be. So between dives, we researched everything we could find about the diamond, including visiting the local graveyard where there were the remains from some of the people that died when the diamond wrecked. And by 2009, we were able to be in a position where we could compare our underwater findings with the research that we'd gathered about the diamond. And the first thing that we were able to pinpoint was, having surveyed the site, we knew that it was going to be in excess of 49 meters. We measured 49 meters of the intact parts of the wreck on the site, but because we're working at the turn of the bilge, by the time you get up to the weather deck, it would be considerably longer than that, somewhere probably between 50 and 60 meters. And at that length, we'd be expecting to find a tonnage for this vessel of about 1,000 tons, somewhere close to that. But the diamond, however, was considerably smaller than that, and only half the tonnage we'd expect. So that already threw up some red flags as to the viability of this wreck on this site being the diamond. And once we added all the other bits and pieces, we could compare both our underwater findings with what we knew about the diamond. I won't go through them, we haven't got the time in detail, but the one that jumps out at us is the fact that when the diamond was lost in 1825, the trees from which the oak timber frames on the site were cut were not only still growing, but they were not felled for at least the next 15 years. So this is pretty conclusive that this isn't the diamond on this site. So our conclusions were that it isn't, and we duly provided and produced an interim report on our findings, and we'd answered Cadu's question, which was great. Since then, of course, not knowing what the vessel is, it's been affectionately but unofficially referred to as the NTD site, or the not the diamond site. So all good. However, this doesn't draw a line under the exercise, really, because it presents us with two additional questions. First of all, if it's not the diamond, what is it? And secondly, where the hell is the diamond? So we are interested to try and resolve and answer these two questions as well. So further investigation and research is necessary, or was necessary at that time. And in an attempt to answer these questions, we produced a database of all the vessels known to have been involved in incidents in the area from which we hoped the vessel might emerge. We started off with Ivor Wynne-Jones's chart here with 170 odd vessels, and we produced a data sheet. It consists of 6 pages of A3. Each line was one line dedicated to a vessel, and we finished up with 450 vessels, with basically not much more than the name of the vessel, if we knew it, its date of wrecking, its length, and its tonnage, and maybe not much more. But however, we didn't have the time or the resources to investigate 450 vessels in detail. Fortunately, in 2010, Wessex Archaeology were commissioned by Cadu to conduct a series of maritime geophysical surveys off the Welsh coast, including a complete sweep over the entire length of St Badrig. And the following year, they produced the report on their findings. And here's an image from their report, and you can see the reef itself outlined there in that big red marks. And on that reef, they identified 86 anomalies, but of those 86, only 6 looked as if they were intact shipwrecks. The rest were, displaced bits and pieces, maybe the odd anchor and things like that, boilers and things like that, all different periods, all jumbled up. So the designated site there, you can see still called the Diamond on there, we had a look at, and in the Wessex report for that site, there's their side scan sonar showing from that scale. You can see we measured it at being 49 meters, and that pretty much ties in with that side scan, which is obviously 12 meters longer than the diamond itself. And as I said, the actual length of the ship would have been even greater than 49 meters. So the other thing that we know is that we're working just over 2 miles offshore, 2.33 to be precise. We know from the contemporary newspapers of the time when the diamond was lost that the location was reported as being only about a mile from land. So the diamond potentially be one of those other two red dots closer inshore? And the one that we think is the most likely of those two is 7177, which is about just under 3/4 of a mile offshore. And the side scan image from Wessex of that does show it to be, around about the 40 meters, close to the 36.8 that the diamond would be. Now, the other thing that Wessex were asked to do was to provide and look at magnetic signatures of all the anomalies they can come across. And of these, only 35 provided a reading. The one that provided the most reading was our designated site that we think is not the diamond, as we would be indicative of a site with so much iron on the site. And by comparison, 7177 produced no magnetic response, which would be much closer to something that was built with not a lot of iron, if any, but all wood. So we have the thoughts that the hypothesis that the diamond is not what's on the site, but it might be closer inland. Moving forward to 2020, because we're still looking for what the wreck is on that site, we devised a project for our NAS members to help them engage with maritime archaeology during the lockdowns, and we offered our database to them to see if they'd like to research any of these and produce reports on their findings. By the end of a 12-month exercise, the database had grown to 585 vessels, and 275 reports had been compiled by 75 volunteers from 15 different countries, which was absolutely first class. And all these reports are now available free to view on the Unpath Waters project on that website and on our own website, along with a full report about the project itself. So how does this all help identify the wreck on the designated site? Well, by interrogating our database in conjunction with the reports that our volunteers had provided, which nearly all included, as we suggested, a summary sheet of the main features about the specification, the backstory of the vessel they were researching. We were able to interrogate them and conclude from a process of elimination that of the 585 vessels, only 3 were potential candidates: the Pride of the Sea, the Kenilworth, and the Danube. So what we have here is a Goldilocks scenario, if you like, and we're able to look and compare what we were finding underwater with all the data from these. And I haven't got the time to go through this in detail, but the green sections are the areas that really did match with what we were finding underwater. And of the 3, the Danube was the closest. So the future is that the possibility lies that the wreck on the protected wreck site is not the diamond but the Danube, and that the diamond may be closer ashore in that site there. So both these sites need to be de-dived and reviewed with fresh eyes to confirm or refute our ideas here. So we've produced a full report on what we've activities here over the last 25 years. The report is called The Misidentification of Shipwreck in Cardigan Bay. It's fully available to read and look through on our website. And last December, it was also included in the last December's edition of the International Journal of Nautical Archaeology. If people are particularly interested in maritime archaeology in Wales in particular, I would highly recommend this publication. You can see it's available in both English and Welsh. It's a mighty tome, and it covers 10,000 years of Welsh maritime history, as you can see there. So it's a great document. And I'd just like to conclude with a quote. It's from a UNESCO conference held back in 2016. The conference itself had the title The Protection of Underwater Cultural Heritage Sites Against Pillage and Commercial Exploitation. And out of the conference came the following winding up statement. Excuse me. And I'll just read this out to you. So, the largest museum in the world rests under the water, beneath the oceans, lakes and rivers of every nation and on the high seas. From fossil evidence and early human settlements now drowned by rising seas after the Ice Age, to ancient cities and harbours and millions of shipwrecks, this heritage speaks to who we are as humanity. It is essential evidence of humanity's past, not yet put in its rightful place in the public conscience. And I'll just leave you with this image taken from that field school that we run just prior to COVID. It's the remains of the SS Lycian. It's in Abercastle Bay. And what the diver is looking at here is a central spare propeller boss. All those studs that sprout out on each side are where the main blades would have been bolted onto. But this is a midships. It was just stored for safety, and in case they got into damage. So I think that's as much as I can cram in 45 minutes. So many thanks for your attention.